Hello, we meet again. I'm going to talk about some events that happened, that I experienced, and a little bit of history on a place called Death Rock. And that's what it's called, Death Rock. And it has a bit of a tragic history to it, as the name implies. Not that death is necessarily tragic, but some of the things that happened at Death Rock were tragic. Not all of them. I had a good experience there. Almost a tragic one. Alright. No cup of tea tonight. I just lost my job at Walmart. Let's just get it out there. I'm retired Army and I really didn't need the income so much, but I enjoyed working there. And the reason I lost my job, right, I guess I gotta get this over with, wasn't because I was a bad worker. We all get along very well. I made a mistake. I thought I had a day off, and I took some time off, didn't show up for work that I thought I had vacation time for. Come to find out, I didn't. It wasn't approved. I thought it was. So they very regretfully informed me tonight that that was it. By their rules, it was out of their hands. I no longer had a job there. They asked me to come back in a week, and they would hire me back as soon as the manager was back from vacation. They were pretty sure they would like to hire me back because I'm a good worker. I may go back, I may not. I don't know. It's time to move on anyway. So I'm having a stout here with this. And I want to try to get through this. What I'm going to talk about tonight is part of what I'm going to present in the next couple of stories, hopefully, God willing, about an alternate explanation for hauntings and some other things, spiritual things. All right. This isn't necessarily come out of the Bible, but parts of it I will refer to the Bible. But I gotta say, don't ever let me say anything here that would cause you to disbelieve anything in the Bible. The Bible is my moral compass and anchor and guide, and the living word also talks to me. I believe through prayer and through God's Holy Spirit. So even though I'm going to talk about some things and put some ideas out there that aren't necessarily nailed down in the Bible as scriptural, I'm just going to present this stuff, all right? I've made the case that Jesus and his contemporaries, when he walked the earth in flesh and blood, believed in ghosts and hauntings. The case being New Testament story. The disciples are in at nighttime anchored out in the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus comes walking on water, coming out to be with them. And they probably, this was 2,000 years ago. They had the moon, maybe it was overcast. And stars, maybe. And they probably had some torches. I imagine they had some torches on that ship. And that's all they had. And they see a man walking on the water at night coming out to them. What would you think? I'd be pretty scared myself. Especially when it's not like I've got a motorboat where I can start it up and speed away. They weren't going anywhere in any hurry. So they were terrified. And Jesus, being the gentle king that he is, knew what they were thinking, and he didn't admonish them because he was also their spiritual teacher. They dealt with all kinds of spirits in the New Testament. They cast out demons, they dealt with familiar spirits, they dealt with spiritual attachments, and they believed in ghosts. Though they didn't really talk about ghosts much. There's not a lot of description in these things. So we ponder. And he said to them, "Don't be afraid, it's just me. It's just me." He knew they were thinking he was a ghost. He didn't yell at them and say there's no such thing as ghosts. He said, "Don't be afraid, it's just me." And then again, after Jesus was crucified, and they all saw him, the disciples saw him crucified, and grievous time for them and his family to see this. And that he was then buried in a tomb, and then word got around real quick that the tomb was empty, and people were saying that they were seeing him around town. And Thomas, the disciple, who became known as Thomas the Doubter by some because he doubted that Jesus was walking around town, he said, until I see the nail holes, put my finger in the nail holes of his hands, I'm not going to believe any of this. Knock on the door. They open it. There stands Jesus. And he says, they were terrified. Thomas was terrified. What would you think with somebody you know well and loved? Even if it were somebody, the Son of God, but you saw this man killed and buried, and now he's standing in your doorway. Thomas was terrified. Jesus knew what he thought. He said, here are my hands. Here's the nail holes. You know, I will put this scripture up at the end of this. I'm not quoting it. I'll put it up, the scripture. And he went on to say to them, get me something to eat and drink. He said, ghosts don't need food and water. You know, because he knew they thought he was a ghost and they were afraid. Get me something to eat and drink. Ghosts don't need food and water. I will put that up. So they believed in ghosts. And that's not the only place. In the Old Testament, King David, through something of a medium, which was outlawed, but he broke his own laws and hired a medium to conjure up the spirit, the ghost of the deceased King Samuel. And when Samuel's spirit rose up out of the ground, King David asked him to tell him the future outcome of a battle that was impending, that David was very anxious about. And the deceased King Samuel did, and then went back down into, the underworld, wherever his spirit came from. And David paid a price for that, because God doesn't want us going to mediums then and now. They've been around for a long time. Nothing new. So this has to do with that. It also has to do with Paul, who says in the New Testament, he talks about having two natures within himself at war with each other. One nature is divine and wants to be a pure spirit before God, like we will be when we go to be with God. And I'll get into that hopefully in future videos. When we're before the presence of the Lord as a spirit, when we leave this world, then we will be glorified, as Jesus put it, in glorified bodies. But now we have two spirits, one of the earth that wrestles with us with carnal desires, fear, lust, anger, you name it, doubt, wrestling with the blessed spirit. Paul complains about two natures within him. So just keep that in mind, tuck it away. Now I'm going to tell the stories of Death Rock, and I'm going to try to get through this quicker than I have. Give you a moment to digest what I just said. Death Rock got its name, legend I heard. You could Google it. Maybe they'll tell you something different, but what I was told was during the French and Indian War, which took place around this area, with the English colonists were allied with we were colonists, and we weren't America quite yet. 1756, mid-1700s, 1750s that is. The French and their Indian allies were coming down from North Canada, Quebec and such, and were raiding the English colonies. And the British Army came over and organized with the colonials, militia, and certain Indian tribes, and you had the French and Indian War. And the English, of course, and the British soldiers and the colonists and their Indian allies successfully defeated the French and their Indian allies. And that was the end of that. Except, apparently, around where Whitehall is today, and Death Rock, it was called Skenesborough then. Skene being the name of the British commanding officer of the time of this 1750s French and Indian War. And apparently some of the English were involved romantically with some of the Indian women, because legend has it that an Indian woman was in love with a British officer, and when that war was over, he had to go back to England and she couldn't go with him. And she climbed up the top of Death Rock and threw herself off the ledge and committed suicide. And they've called it Death Rock ever since. So that's the dark kind of backstory on the name Death Rock. Now, my own experiences there. I actually had a mystical experience there, but it was positive. It turned out to be positive. It started rather dark. I almost lost my faith. And I really wasn't quite suicidal, but I was close to it. And that's another story. And I'll post that link to that story in the description. And that story was called Wolves in Sheep's Clothing and the Spirit Hawk. That's what I titled it. And that's what it's about. And that's about 7 years old from the time of this telling of this tonight. So I had an experience there. And then I was going up that hill as a training sergeant for that company. I used to go up there alone a lot and set up training. It could be for war games or moving around at night with a bunch of army men, you know, and just training infantrymen up in those mountains on all kinds of infantry things. And I would go up there before we went up to to train, and I would set things up. So we didn't just go up there and, you know, play around the woods like a bunch of kids. I had things set up. So I was hiking up there one day to set things up for training that was coming up in the mountains, Death Rock area, where we trained a lot. And this guy that worked in the armory, Ben, he tagged along with me. Now at the time of this story, I was about 27, I was 27 years old. Here's a picture of me then. And this picture was taken at the time and place. This isn't where this happened, but it's pretty close to it. All right, it's in the same area, but this isn't the reservoir where this happened that I'm going to tell you about with Ben and me. So that's me then. Here's me now. Wow. So I'm hiking up this hill. A dirt service road goes halfway up the mountain. It did then. And then it stopped at a giant pond that the town, I think, used for their main water reservoir, the village, which is at the base of the mountain. And Ben went up there with me. I liked his company. He'd been divorced and kind of a sad, kind of mellow guy, about 51, 52 then. And we got to talking, and I just remember walking up that dirt road with him. And Ben slept on the ground, or slept on the floor in his apartment with just a mattress on the floor. That was his bed. And he liked his beers, and he had a dog. And that's it, pretty much. I don't even think he drove. He was a real quiet, kind of gentle kind of person. And I liked Ben. He was kind of like myself, but a little older, because I was living the same way. I was alone, trying to get close to God, and close to God and nature as much as I could. And I didn't have the distraction of a wife or anything at the time, but I'd recently gone through a divorce, and that was part of the reason of my story, the Wolves in Sheep's Clothing and the Spirit Hawk. That all ties in. Ben and I are walking up the mountain and we're talking, and that's all I remember, that his bed was just a mattress on the floor, and he liked to drink his beer. Well, we got to the top where the road ended. That's to say about halfway up the mountain to Death Rock, from there on, you had to go cross country, you know, up through the woods till you got to the top a little ways. We're standing by this water reservoir, giant pond, really beautiful place. And where we're standing in the grass next to the water, there was a large oak or maple tree, I don't know which, really big one, a very old tree, and part of it hung out over the water. And I got these vibes there standing with him, and I said to him, imagine the stories that tree could tell if it could talk. You know what he said to me? I said, imagine the stories that tree could tell if it could talk. He said, yes, he said, my father hung himself in that tree. I'm like, what? And he just said, yes, that's right. My father hung himself in that tree. And I didn't press for information or anything. I just was kind of speechless. And we just left it there. Coincidence? I get vibes from that place. And that's why I said that, but I really didn't think I would hear that. All right, the other event that's tied to this, not long after this event happened, I just told with Ben and the tree and the water reservoir, there was a young man murdered, found not far from there, his body. And that little town then, and I'm sure it still does, like a lot of small towns do, sadly, you know, you drive through them and they're very pretty places, but they had drug problems going on there, and drug deals and crime of that sort in the background going on. And word had it that a guy had been murdered, a young man had been murdered over a drug deal that went bad, and his body was found not far from there, not too far from this pond and the tree I just talked about. Down that dirt service road a little ways was a concrete or a cinder blocks, not painted, very nondescript cinder block building that housed a lot of pump gear, water pump gear that the town or the village used. And that building was about as big as the room I'm in right now, which is my dining room. And that's where they found this man's body, young man's body. And they did catch the killer, I'm pretty sure. Everybody knew who it was. And it was very tragic and very senseless murder. Well, I was up there this time alone, setting up training on Death Rock. Before I was bringing the guys, we'd march up there as a company, in our uniforms and our guns and stuff. And I don't know, it was a big deal. That company's no longer in that town. That they disbanded, reorganized. But back then it was a big deal for that little town. We'd march through town, down the street, from the army, right down the road. March up there, and all the village liked to watch. And everybody in that little town either had somebody in that unit, or they knew somebody that was, or their father or grandfather was. That guard unit went back a long ways in history in that town, a long ways. But I was up there alone. All right, I digress. And I'd set up training up there, and I was coming down the hill alone, walking down that dirt road. I went past the pond. I'm coming up to that cinder block building where the young man's body was found that was murdered not too long before this. And I see a man, a big guy. I'm 6 foot tall. He was probably 6'2", 6'3", taller than me. Kind of light brown hair, long beard, looked like a Viking or something. Had his shirt off. That's to say he had jeans and work boots on, and no shirt, no hat. And he had a sledgehammer in both hands, and he was beating the heck out of that building, screaming at the top of his lungs obscenities, non-stop raging obscenities. And his face and his body were red and sweaty, and he was putting every ounce of himself and anger into screaming obscenities and pounding on that building with a sledgehammer. I mean, it was just insane. And I stopped. He didn't see me. That's to say he's about 50 feet in front of me, and he didn't see me. he was so intent what he was doing with that sledgehammer and screaming like he was, obscenities and rage. I said, whoa. I'm looking at this guy, and he looked dangerous. But I never backed down from anybody. Back then, I'm a training sergeant, I didn't back down from anybody. My instinct was to go around and dodge this guy, but I said to myself, I'm going to walk right by him and say, hey, how's it going? And just keep walking. Yep. So I kept walking towards him, and he still didn't see me. And something inside me said, no, don't. I call it the inner voice of reason, for lack of whatever you want to call it. It said, no, don't. And the guy, so I stopped again, and the guy still didn't see me. And he said, no, go around him. Go way into the woods and bypass this guy. And I said, yeah, I think that's probably what I should do. And I got into the woods. He didn't see me. So if this was him and the road, I cut way around him and then came back on the road and continued on my way. And, he never saw me. Now I came back up there again like a week or two later, and he about demolished that center block building. It was about 1/3 of it was smashed in. I mean, he did a lot of damage to that place. I have no idea why or who he was. I imagine it had to have been tied into that young man's body being found there. Was it the ghost of that young man? I don't know. I don't know what the guy looked like. I didn't know him, but some of my friends knew him. But I don't know what that was about. But there was some negative energy. Obviously, somebody was murdered there. And not long before this happened. And there was some negative energy with the 2 suicides of the Indian woman in the 1750s and Ben's father, who hung himself. And who knows what else happened there. I almost did. My story turned out good because God had not forgotten me. That's another story I already told. So where am I going with this? Well, I'm going to try to tie it in the next videos coming after this of what Paul said about having 2 within himself at war with each other, one of the earth and carnal desires, and one blessed of God, that one's pulling him one way and the other's pulling him the other. And thanks be to Jesus Christ alone that saves us from ourselves. I think that maybe that place had a lot of negative human energy attached to it. That's not to say that it had the actual spirit of these people that were killed or committed suicide there. I don't think God leaves people there. I don't think God would leave you. I think you're too important to God for him to leave you there. I think the Protestants both get it right and they get it wrong, because I've had a lot of them, tell me there's no such thing as ghosts. It's all demonic, all of it. I'm like, no, some of it is. And I don't advocate trying to communicate at all. Some of it is. You don't know which is, but not all of it. On my channel, I've had a lot of hauntings, and some of them I definitely didn't get a bad vibe from, and they didn't really, wasn't any, just seemed to be attached to a place, a former life. The 3 ghost soldiers at Fort Drum, I wasn't threatened by them at all. What were they doing? I'm not going to retell these stories. A lot of my stories seem to be the record, of the former people that have died there. And I didn't feel threatened by them. They just were still there. And that's always troubled me. Like, why would God leave these people here? You know what I mean? To wander around this meaningless, kind of dark existence, haunting places. That is not answered in the Bible. And even though I believe Christ and his contemporaries believed in ghosts and hauntings, it's not really told what these things are. And I don't believe that they're the actual person. That is to say, the eternal being, the personality with a free will that God gave it and a purpose. I think it might be just the collective kind of energy of that person. I think there's more to us than just flesh and blood and spirit. I think there's an earthly spiritual energy to us as well. That is our identity while we're here. That's not in the Bible, really. So that's just me, some conjecture here. And that maybe that energy was still there. I picked up on something standing with Ben next to that tree. I'd never heard about his father. I didn't really know Ben that well. Come to find out, that his father hung himself in that tree when I said if that tree could tell stories. Or the young, the guy pounding the heck out of that pump house there, berserk, right after somebody was murdered there. And a lot of other things that I will go into in, God willing, future videos, because I can't really tie it together in this video. This is just a preamble to the ones that I have in mind coming up. Pre-ramble, I ramble on. Oh, prelude, whatever you want to call it. And that, my friends, is that. Till next time. God bless each of you. Keep the faith, my friends.